Hey everyone, welcome to Destination Never Here. Today's guest is Peter Forcelli. He's a retired Deputy Assistant Director of the ATF. He's got some fascinating stories about the Fast and the Furious. He was one of the whistleblowers involved in the illegal gun running cases down to Mexico. He's a really good friend. He's a great human being. Most importantly, he's transparent, and I think you're going to find this interview fascinating. We talk about what a young Peter looks like. We talk about his time at Ground Zero on September 11th, 2001. We talk about his time in other active shooters. We talk about his perspective as a police officer of how we can stop active shooters. And you know we're on the mission to get to the destination never here. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Hey everyone, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you, my name's Chris Grollnek and I'm your host. More importantly, the executive producer is Ruben Rohel. He works behind the scenes for everything we do, and I'm very grateful for it. Without him, there'd be no Destination Never Here. I want to thank our sponsors, Midpoint. Midpoint Technology Group is one of the best integrators that we work with, but more importantly, they're just great friends. And the entire community of experts of the Active Shooter Prevention Project. Thank you all for your support. We're going to stop these together, everyone. Thanks for being on our journey. And I just want to welcome you, Peter, to the show. And from everybody at Destination Never Here, thanks so much.
Hey, Chris, good to be here. I appreciate the invite.
So the way I started this off, you know, we talk about vulnerability and authenticity of people, because so many people get on websites, vlogs, podcasts, and they tell a story they want everyone to hear. And I try to reverse engineer that sometimes and use some of that police engineering that I have, or, you know, interview skills, if you will, and find out how can we tell the story of what the audience wants and what we don't really want to answer. So some of those things come across a little bit uncomfortable, but before we get into that, is there anything I need to clean up about your opening or your title, or the title of how you retired from the ATF?
No, it's fine.
Right
Spot on.
Right on. Cool. Yeah. Well, sometimes I get it wrong. So I was on with a doctor from BSU the other day and said BAU. So, you know, Freudian slip, but it worked out fine. Big difference there. So I think that we want to jump in today and start off with a couple, you know, just telling things. I was talking to you before the show today, and I do a lot of research on my guests as much as I can, and talk to other people that know them and talk to about experiences. And I read some of their posts because I think those are really telling. And I found two genuinely, they punched me in the mouth saying, Chris, you know, make sure you ask about this. I want to get them both out of the way first because it's right up front in your face.
Sure.
We hold something in common with our family, I think, which is unique. But I want to hear your story, and I want you to tell the audience about your story. I'm going to throw you a couple of hints and see if you catch on. Well, of course you're going to. December 31st, I believe, you were supposed to work one evening and switch shifts. Could you tell us what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I was a cop in the New York City Housing Authority Police Department. That's where I started before Giuliani merged the three departments together. And on December 31st, my wife went into labor. And, you know, in New York, the ball drops. So, I mean, it's like an army of cops down there. And then, you know, obviously they need people to patrol the streets. So to get the night off is like, requires almost an act of God. So when she went into labor, I called the precinct and said I needed the day off. And I spoke to the precinct commander, which is a captain, which is a pretty high ranking person in the police department of New York. And he didn't even have the authority to approve the time off. So he had to call the inspector, which is one rank below a chief in the NYPD. So he made no guarantees, but eventually he got back to me and said, hey, Pete, no problem. You know, you have the day off, the evening off. So my wife was in labor in the Bronx. And as the evening went on, my partner, who I worked with for years, Pat Kelly, great guy, very humble, very soft-spoken gentleman. He was partnered up with an officer named Beltran, who I knew a little bit. I don't know him very well. And so that was my replacement for the evening. So a couple times as, you know, the labor went on, because it went on for quite some time, he would stop by to check up on me in the hospital, because the hospital was also in the Bronx. And, you know, brought me coffee. We talked for a little while. Then, of course, I had to go back into the labor room, couldn't hang out with him. And shortly after midnight, my daughter was born. She was the second baby born in Bronx in 1994. And so I called the precinct to let Pat know that, hey, it's a girl, and everything went well. And when I called the precinct, I get a response like, well, who's this? And I was like, it's Pete Forcelli. It's like, well, Pete, haven't you heard? I hadn't heard. And what happened was Pat Kelly and Officer Beltran were shot by a young man with a rifle from the roof of 1132 East 229th Drive South in the Eden Wall projects. So of course my heart dropped. Here was like, the most joyous moment of my life that I had, my first child, and then I find out my partner, who was one of my best friends, was shot. Thankfully, he was not seriously injured, neither was the other officer, but it was a shocker. But from that point forward, it was always this perception that if my daughter had not been born that day, I might have been there and maybe I wouldn't have been as lucky. So, I mean, I know that, or maybe I wouldn't have got shot at all. I mean, who knows? But there's always this belief that maybe my daughter was in some way a good luck charm. Yeah, that's the story.
That's a great story too. And I'm telling you, like I see that as a prevention thing, right? You don't even know what you prevent, but it happens. And you can look back and say, we can try to rewrite history or rewrite the clock or whatever you want to call it. But the serendipitous path of how you ended up here today, and, unfortunate for the officers, I'm really glad they're okay. Obviously being a retired copper myself, that's like the number one thing. But what a great story. And I'll tell you, when I read that, it just hit me as if some things just aren't meant to be. Your time's not ready. The card's not ready to be punched. And I'm really proud to know you. I mean, that's just a great story, because whatever you believe in, right? I'm not asking anybody to believe in anything, believe in what you want, but there's some bigger power there that guides your path every day. And man, that's great. So
Yeah. No,
I hope you don't mind that I went there, but that was a great thing that I read.
well, look, when you invited me on the show, what did I tell you? I said I'm an open book, right? I believe that it's important to be authentic. So there's no question that's off the table. I said it before we came on, and I'll say it right here on camera. If I know the answer, you'll know the answer.
That's great. That's great. Well, like I said, this is all about you. So, and I want to talk about your book too, but let's go back a little bit. Take me back to a young for Sally, about 15 years old, trying to figure out what he wants to do in life. How did you take those steps forward?
Well, I mean, from before that, I always wanted to be a cop. What it started was when I was a young kid. I lived in a pretty bad part of Yonkers, New York, which is just north of the Bronx. And it's kind of a weird story. There was a shooting that happened across the street from my house. Yonkers police narcotics were doing a buy bust, and the cop shot the suspect. The buy bust went sideways, I guess. I mean, I was too little to know back then. And I remember there was a big crime scene, and the people, because I mean, I lived near housing projects, people were like spilling out of the projects, and there's like the yellow tape was up. And I remember the only people that could go on the other side of the yellow tape were the cops. And I just felt like intrigued, like, wow, there's something going on there. And those are the guys who know what's going on. And everybody else kind of wants to know, but they can't know. So, that was an incident that like really kind of had an impact on me. And like, I never had a negative impact to police, because I was raised to believe the police, are there to help you, and you respect your police. So, that coupled with a lot of cop shows growing up, um, you know,
What was your
kind of
favorite?
drove me. Yeah, they drove me to want to be a cop. But it's funny because during that time, I was actually in a school. It was a trade school, so it was a high school, but you also studied like a trade, and I studied carpentry. So I mean, I learned how to work with wood. I wasn't really a very good fine carpenter. You wouldn't never hire me to put fine cabinetry in your house because there'd be little ding marks on it. So I realized that carpentry wasn't going to work for me. I took the NYPD test in 10th grade, because back then you could be 16 and a half and take the test and get hired at age 20. So I kind of knew early on where I was going. And that's one of the reasons why I never really looked at the military or anything like that, is because I knew that, at some point, once I turned 20, I had a job and I didn't want to miss out if they called me and then I wasn't around. And I didn't know back then that, with military service, they would have had to give me a job anyway. When you're a civilian and you're not familiar with civil service law. So I was, I did some little work here and there, worked at a hospital for a while, fixing things, and then started with the NYPD in January of 1987. I was barely 20 years old, man. It was crazy.
One of my favorite questions to ask people, because they say, oh, I either knew I wanted to be a cop or it was some path that brought me there. But as a police officer, or you get into that federal law enforcement, especially from NYPD, go back in your mind to somewhere between, maybe I would ask, 13 and 17. What stupid decision did you make, or did you have one of those moments in your life where you look back, you woke up the next day and said, wow, and 20 years later you're like, oh my gosh, that could have been so much different.
Chris, my life is full of stupid decisions, to include some that I made in law enforcement. I mean, we're not perfect. No, I mean, when I was in
Cheers.
high school, I smoked some marijuana back in those days. I experimented with it. I'm not going to say I didn't like it. Obviously I couldn't stay doing that stuff because I wanted to be a cop. So, I mean, that's something I don't, I'm not thrilled about that I did. There were times I'd go out with friends and, the big thing back then was everybody, you'd light a garbage can on fire in the football field of the high school and hang out at night and drink, and the cops would come and chase us, and we ran away, and I was fortunate enough to never get caught. Like, I wasn't like a kid that was raised I was raised by strict parents, and if the cop ever lumped me up and I got brought home, man, the beating would have been far worse when I got home. But I did things that kids do, and look, I think things like that actually help you as a cop, because if you live a sheltered life and you don't have life experience, then you're not going to understand where people are coming from, and that people make mistakes, and what separates us from them is just one or two choices in life. But yeah, I did some dumb things growing up. I think we all do.
That's beautiful. I mean, I ran away from home at 14, dropped out of school in eighth grade. I have similar stories, but the funny thing is, just give a shout out to our producer here, Ruben Roel, who's, producing. So he's in the background. He's not going to come on, but I'll tell you, he can verify, and maybe he'll drop it in the chat somewhere. We are 100 for 100. When we ask somebody, tell me something stupid you did, everyone on the show has told us they've run from the cops at some point in their life. And I that's beautiful to me, because I mean, I was dumb as a kid. I didn't get into drugs or drinking. I got into like girls and cars and shooting and firearms. My step grandfather got me into it, and I was more of an enthusiast. But I was dumb as a street car racer. I'd street race every day if I could. But yeah, just some fun stuff. But I appreciate that. So tell me, looking back, how did you kind of already answered this, but was there a moment that you were ever on the side of the road or at a housing project or even in the ATF, and you have that person that you recognize yourself a little bit in, right? Doesn't matter race, creed, anything like that. I'm talking about just the human aspect of the other side of the badge. And you're there and they're doing something stupid, and there you are, and you have the opportunity to change their life. Do you have any of those stories that you remember that stand out, like that one that says, yeah, this one kid?
Yeah, there were a few, and look, I always tried to not be judgmental. And like, even when I was a supervisor, I never took it like that. Supervising people means that you have power over them. I looked at it as that you're serving them. You're guiding them, you're getting them the resources they need to get the job done. But yeah, there's one that stands out. But it's actually when I was in charge of ATF's Miami office. We were getting ready to do a search warrant, and like, as the special agent in charge, I'm not hands on at all. I mean, there's several people below me that are supervising things. So I'm the head of the office. But I remember pulling up to an area where we were about to hit a door, and I saw an agent sitting across the street. Well, not sitting, standing in dark clothing. He didn't have a police indicia on his uniform, and he's wearing a balaclava, and he was holding an M4, standing on school grounds. Right. So his job was cover. Yeah, exactly. His job was cover across the street, in case somebody runs. So I pull up, and it just like, I kind of lost my mind a little bit, but I didn't blow up or anything. I'm just like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. So I grab him, and I'm like, hey man, what are you doing? And he's like, well, he goes, I got outside cover. I go, yeah, why are you on school grounds with a balaclava? You're not marked. Like, what are you doing? Are you freaking crazy? So he's like, well, boss, I do a lot of undercover. I don't want anybody to burn me. And I'm like, well, if you do that much undercover, brother, you should be in the command post, not out here. And look, technically under ATF policy, you're not supposed to wear a balaclava unless you're on a SWAT team or unless you have permission. And he didn't have that permission, because I would have been the level that he would have needed it from. So, but the fact that he didn't like apologize right away, he kind of like defended it, because he allegedly did so much undercover and he didn't do that much. Like I said, whatever. So I was like, all right.
Beholder.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened is I said, listen, man, I want you to show up. Look, I could have wrote him up. I could have did something that would have put him on paper. It would have lasted on his file. I was like, look, okay, I get it. I want you in the office next week, because we have different groups, and then there's division office. Division office is like where the paperwork gets done. It's not where agents want to be, unless sure, you're injured, or you're a person that has to go home at a certain time because you have a kid or something. So I said, I want you in the office in a suit for 2 weeks. So this guy was just broken, like beaten down. But I mean, the other option was writing him up. So I remember, he'd come in, he'd answer phones, he did his job. You could just see like shoulders slumped forward. He was just like broken. So about a week into it, I said, Jeff, come in my office. So he did, sat down. I said, listen, man, did you learn something? He's like, yeah, boss, I fucked up. I'm so sorry. I was like, all right, look, I said, next week, go back to your group. You don't have to come back here. I said, just reflect on this next time you think about doing something silly. I said, you're a good agent, man. I said, I get it. Your intentions were pure, but you got to think things through. I said, you realize you're feeding into that whole black helicopter crowd who people think that, ATF is doing stupid things by doing something like standing on school grounds with an M4. I said, you do realize that a school resource officer, somebody could have thought you were an active shooter, and this would have been really ugly. And he got it. So, but look, I've made mistakes like that too, where you get a little bit ambitious and you do things, that senior cops grab you and say, hey man, stop, because they have the experience that you don't have. So, I mean, it's a gift to be able to give that experience back. But I just, I would never penalize somebody for making an honest mistake. Especially if they want to go out there and they're trying to do the job. I mean, that's what a leader's supposed to do, is guide you, not crush you. So I could have wrote him up. He could have got jammed up, or would have stayed in his file. I didn't think it was an intentional mistake. It was certainly a stupid one, but
Sure.
like I said, man, I've made plenty of those myself. So.
Yeah, if I knew better, I would have done better. Those are the I used to. I have another joke that I would tell people from my days as a policeman, or damage to city property. Dear Chief, no one was as surprised as I. When you read those, and then you become a supervisor and you read them, and you're like, "Are you kidding me?" And you have to bring yourself back down to, oh, humanity. Forgot about that. Yeah, I think I asked those questions because so many people call me and write me, and I have a large following on LinkedIn and other platforms where people message me. Not so much social media, but they have my address in the ether, and ask me, I want to join the military, but I smoke weed. I want to join the police, but I've done something stupid. I have a misdemeanor, whatever. I try to give them good counsel, but coming from other audience members, especially somebody like a participant like you, with your creds and your background, I think it'll really resonate with a couple people. And you never know how many people you're going to help that see this and never reach out. But right on.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to jump into the second part of the theme now. That's going to be on the 9/11 side. So I was reading that you were transitioning from NYPD, I believe, right? Because they had merged by then, after 9/11 onto the ATF, and I believe you've already been hired, but there was a problem or there was something I didn't quite understand. But you needed to respond to ground zero, or you needed to respond as an ATF person, and that you had a badge and gun, but you hadn't gone through any FLETC. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. It was weird. Like back in the day, if you were prior law enforcement and you came on with ATF, they would give you your badge and gun day one. And sometimes you'd even start working cases. And that was the situation with me. In fact, I took a case from the NYPD that I was working, that my boss, it was in its infancy. He's like, hey, just take it. It was a home invasion case. But yeah, so I left the NYPD in late May of 2001. In fact, my retirement date's in June because I had to leave, and so it kind of carried over. But so on September 11th, I was an agent. I was a new agent. Didn't really know everybody in the field division because they weren't all situated in the same area. Like, people were in different parts of the building. And I was actually on my way to the U.S. Attorney's office in Lower Manhattan, which is not that far from Ground Zero as the crow flies. It's probably like a quarter mile. And I remember I was just north of the three bridges, which is like the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, and the Williamsburg Bridge on the FDR Drive, when my boss called me and said a plane hit the North Tower. And, I mean, look, those were the two tallest buildings in Manhattan, but there were skyscrapers between me and them. So I couldn't see, and I didn't even see smoke, to be honest with you. So, I mean, my first thought is like somebody in like a Cessna or something hit the World Trade Center. So he wanted me to get there. So I got there. And so lights and sirens probably took me about 5-10 minutes to get there. It was the first time I found a parking space without having to look for a parking space in New York. And I remember, like, as I pulled up to the building leaning forward, because I was so close to the North Tower, which had been hit. I was on the other side of 7 World Trade, which was only like a 53 or 57-story building. And I remember having to lean forward like you do when you get too close to like a traffic light to watch for when it changes. And I remember seeing a slash in the building. And then I got out of the car after a while, for a few seconds, threw on my raid jacket, and went down south on Greenwich Street, made a left. And that's when I saw a plane engine like detached from the building on the corner of Church Street and Vesey Street. And that's when I was like, wow, this is like a commercial airliner. Because I'm not that smart. Like I said, even when I saw the slice in the building, I never realized the size of the plane. And yeah, so I got tasked with after helping move some people around. Eventually, one of my bosses from ATF grabbed me, and she's like, hey man, we need to rally up all the troops, because when there's a fire alarm or something, there's like, you're supposed to go to a muster location so they could do a head count. Nobody went to the muster location. But it was weird because I didn't know all the ATF people. So when I went into Ground Zero to try to round them up, I was like, I don't know, if I'm going to find anybody that I know, but I'll do what I can. And eventually I did. I found two ATF agents that were down there. I was on the other side of Church Street from the South Tower when one of the agents grabbed my left shoulder like hard, and he just said one word. It was run. And I remember looking up and seeing, if you ever look at how the footage of how the tower fell, the first tower was the South Tower. It looked like it was falling from like a domino from where we were standing. But if you ever look at the footage, like what happened was the top canted over and then the building fell straight down. So I remember just running for my life and get hit square between the shoulder blades with something. And I jumped under a fire truck for a little while, just for seconds, felt like minutes, and thinking that, that the two agents I was with were dead. And it was weird because the reason I didn't notice the building falling is I was fixated on some NYPD emergency service unit guys that were heading into the plaza by the South Tower. And I knew three of them. I knew three of them really well: John Coughlin, Vinny Dans, and Walter Weaver. And Vinny Dans, me and Vinny went through the academy together. And Vinny had grabbed his like shirt, like, what's up with the raid jacket? Because I left quietly, like I didn't leave. There was no party or send off. I literally left NYPD on a Friday and started with ATF on a Monday. So Vinny didn't know I was with ATF. But yeah, I watched those guys walk into the plaza by the South Tower, and look, I barely got away from there, and I thought the two agents died. I knew Vinny, John, and Walter, and the other ESU guys they were with were gone. I mean, there's no way they would have survived from where they were standing. So yeah, I mean, it was a crazy few days. But yeah, it turned out 7 guys that I worked with over the years had passed, including one guy who was a cop that jumped ship to the fireman. But the sick part, man, is probably like 3 times that number have died of 9/11 related illnesses since then. And that's of the people I knew. I mean, more people have died of 9/11 related illnesses now than died on 9/11. And those numbers are just going to keep going up. So it's crazy, man. It's just a rough part of my life to have lived through, but I'm still here, thank God.
And bravo. And I know that it's awkward for people to hear, oh my gosh, another person say, hey, well, thank you so much for what you did. And you're like, well, I got sent there, I'd go again. But
Yeah.
I mean that. I mean, genuinely, somebody that's been not through that, but something similar, not to 9/11, of course, but an emergency incident like that where other people, not everybody came home. Hats off to you, brother, because that's something else to live with. And you articulate it so well, where it's like I brought myself into that moment, and I think the audience probably did too. So good, right on. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, no, you pointed out something, man, that's important. It's like, I'm a New Yorker, even though I don't live in New York anymore. I had to be there. Like think back on it, and despite, I had lung cancer later on as a result of responding there, lost a lung. If I was down at FLETC, because they sent me to FLETC almost 2 years later because I had my badge and gone, and then it was like, hey man, you're working on rescue recovery efforts, you got cases going on, we'll send you when we send you, which was kind of scary because you have 1 year to go back to the NYPD. And the ATF Academy is no joke. So if I failed out, I was screwed. I would have had to be a bad carpenter. Yeah, it was kind of crazy, but it just, if I was at FLETC when that happened, I think I would have lost my mind because I would have felt like I needed to be there and help. But in hindsight, too, the weird thing is we really didn't help anybody because people either got out or they died. Like there wasn't a lot of helping folks. It was just kind of helpless feeling because of just mass casualty, and there wasn't a lot of rescuing happening. I know there were a couple Port Authority cops that were dug out, a few others, but for the most part, man, the people that got out, and the people that didn't survive.
Do you mind if I ask you, what's that like watching both sides of the coin? One is the conspiracy theories of there was no 9/11 or it was staged or whatever, vis-a-vis the other side, which is you have to live with that memory of responding every day as quote unquote not a responder but a responder, because again, you got sent there, wasn't a choice, right? But you would have gone anyways because there's no place you'd rather be. But what could you show it what that, or tell us what that position is from both sides of the coin, left of watching these things and hearing them on YouTube and TV and all the different media, because we have more information than ever now, versus the other side of the reality of being there and what you have to carry around, or what you're missing, your lung. I mean,
Yeah. Well, look, and if this is going to sound stupid and crazy, for everything I lost, I gained, because look, I was one of those people that was so caught up in the job that I really wasn't in touch with my family. I wasn't even really in touch with myself. Like I had FOMO. I wanted to be at work and for this big shootout or the big search warrant or the big recovery. And getting lung cancer later on made me realize all the things that I missed because some folks talked some sense into me and said, "Hey, man, you need to get back into paying attention to your family because you're going to retire one day, and the job's going to forget you. The job doesn't love you. You may love the job, it doesn't love you back." But and then look, man, I dealt for some years with some survivor's guilt because those guys I watched walk into the building were part of a team that I tried to join. Didn't join the issue. I tried out for it. I couldn't handle the heights, frankly, because NYPD's issue also does rescue work, so bridge
Right.
jumpers and stuff like that. And just I wasn't the guy, but I went through the ESU training with Vinny Dans and John Coughlin. They were the first guys from housing to go through ESU. So I mean, them dying kind of rocked my world a little bit because I was like, hey man, if I wasn't such a coward and wasn't afraid of heights, I would have been there with those guys. That was difficult to swallow, but it put me in a dark place for a while. But the look, I used to get really upset about the conspiracy theorists, folks. I don't anymore because I just not that I believe the conspiracy. I don't think that's the case at all. It's just that I realize that people are just wired differently. But I used to get genuinely pissed off. But I'll tell you what, man, like the big thing for them was always how the seven world trade collapsed. It looked like it had to be detonation. The way, recently, I don't know if you remember, there was a building that collapsed in South Florida,
Yes.
right? Okay. Well, that collapsed because underneath the parking garage was undermined by water damage, if you remember correctly. If you look at that building
That,
collapse
that's right.
and you look
Miami,
at,
right?
yeah, well, just north of Miami, I forgot.
Sure.
I think it might have been Aventura or close to that. But if you look at that collapse and then you look at how Seven World Trade Center collapsed, man, I mean, that brought back stark memories. I was like, holy shit, it's exactly the same. Well, under Seven World Trade Center was the same parking garage and shopping mall that was under the two towers. I mean, underneath that whole plaza was a massive shopping complex and a parking garage. So, I mean, to me, that helped, for some people who might want to be rational. If you look at those two collapses, it might explain to some of them how Seven World Trade came down. It came down because its foundation was undermined. I mean, it looked exactly the same. But there's some folks you'll never convince, and look, whatever. People are entitled to their opinions. I used to get really mad. It's not worth it anymore. I don't think that our government would do that. And look, as I've blown the whistle on some stupid shit our government has done, as you know.
We're
So,
going to talk about that. Yeah.
right. But yeah, so no, I don't see that as making any sense. But hey, man, believe what you want to believe. It's America. We can do that.
I think the one enlightening moment that came, I just shared this the other day, and it wasn't on a podcast, it was somewhere else. But when I turned over 50, like a light switch in my head went off. And some people have it and some people don't. And, I never really wanted to be a cop. Now, my favorite cop shows were like SWAT and Adam 12 and all that other stuff. But I wanted to take a different route in life. I really had something totally different planned out. And for those that follow me know, I wanted to be a polygrapher. I wanted to interview
Oh, wow.
people. Yeah, I mean, the whole 9 yards. And I had a pretty good path drawn out after the Marine Corps. I was a drill instructor in the Marine Corps, and woke up one day and said, I'm going to be a polygrapher. And I don't even know how that happened. But said all that to say this: people don't know what they don't know. And my favorite saying from, like, I think it's the FBI, hell, we don't even know what we do know. And I know that other agencies say that too. But when you go to the places of DOJ and you say, hey, I need to know, and they say, well, we don't even know what we know, and you consult. I think some of the things that I've seen, and I'm going to bring this next part right back into the active shooter, the conspiracy theorists. I didn't realize until we spoke earlier that we were at Pulse and Fort Lauderdale probably the same. I was there a day and a half or 2 days after both of them. I think Fort Lauderdale might have been there the next day. But I spent quite a bit of time there doing private interviews and I can't say, I won't say and can't say, but other types of interviews for other people. And maybe your prior employer, I don't know. And, talking to people, third party wasn't them, but talking to parties, third party, and writing different types of interviews. And I didn't go to Parkland directly, but I've been there 5 times since in the building. We recreated the actual active shooter in real time with real bullets about last July. That stained my brain. We were the first time anyone's ever done that. We had to do it because it was judge court ordered, right? A judge ordered us to. And I hear people that say, well, this didn't happen or that didn't happen. You just get frustrated. But I'm telling you, when I turned like 50, 51, I got enlightened that said, because as a cop, you say, I know everything because you're solving the world's problems in 5-minute increments,
Right.
right?
Right.
25 years of problems in 5-minute increments, right? And you show up. So you're the shell answer man. Now it's, I just chalk it up, you're human. And you know what? A human being does human being things and kind of get fascinated by it. So I appreciate all that candidness and like looking back and thinking, I mean, I can feel that moment though at 9/11 and think through of those shootings and what it must be like to hear that bull coming out of other people's mouth. And you know it is, but you're not going to defend it. You're not going to protect it. You're just going to be like, hey man, you know, good for you. I'm going to McDonald's.
Right, right. Well, look, here's the other thing, man. When agencies get it wrong, because they do, sometimes they do, they have a duty to own it. And one of the things I think that feeds into this whole issue is that sometimes they don't. I mean, you know, when instead they lie, and eventually the truth will always come out. So that's why I've always been like, hey, man, you know, whether it's you or whether it's your field division or whether it's your unit or your team, if you screw up, hey, man, explain why you screwed up and what happened, what you intended to do, and you usually land on your feet. But it's always, you know, what happens is when people cover things up or bury things, that just feeds into these conspiracy theorists, you know, into what they believe. You know, it feeds the beast. So, and look, there's plenty of that in a lot of the mass shootings that have happened in the United States. And I mean, we'll talk about it as much or as little as you want. But yeah, and look, with Pulse, I was at the crime scene briefly. I didn't go inside. I didn't
Oh
see
yeah.
the carnage because the Pulse nightclub was in the area of the Tampa Field Division. Their special agent in charge was out of town at a family memorial. So I was up there briefly, but Omar Mateen lived in our area. So I was involved in the investigation of Mateen. But with the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting and the Parkland shooting, I was at both crime scenes for days. And it's weird, man. Like as a homicide detective, I remember having to do like a kind of a tally of how many homicides I responded to in my entire career as a cop, and it was roughly around 600. And you know how it is, brother. You were a cop, and I know many of your listeners probably are. You kind of build up that shell, you know, that kind of cynical. You almost, I don't want to say we joke about death, but you turned it off. It was
You have
weird,
to.
man. Like at Pulse, not Pulse, I'm sorry, at Fort Lauderdale Airport, and especially at Parkland, um, those crime scenes really got me because I'd been so far removed from homicide scenes that I let that guard down. So I remember getting choked up at both, you know, especially Fort Lauderdale Airport. They were older people mostly. They were about to go on a cruise, about to have the time of their life when that idiot took 5 of their lives, you know. And then with obviously with Parkland, man, it was a coach and 16 kids. So I mean, those, you know, they leave a mark. That's what happens in this profession. You know, you try to build up that thick skin to deal with the nasty stuff that we see. Um, but even when you have that thick skin, man, you know, things leave a mark and they stay with you till you're gone, you know?
I went to a massacre of 4 people, I remember, and that was a pretty big deal in the city that I was working, where I retired out of municipal north of Dallas, and that was where I finished my career at. And I remember being jolted by that, not floored, but I mean the gravity of the crime scene was horrible.
Yeah.
And we, you know, I saw that to fruition. I wasn't the detective that led it or anything. I did a lot of the interviews though, because I was a narco at the time. In fact, I was working on an ATF task force
Huh.
out of Dallas and North Dallas. And you know, when I went to Parkland, nothing choked me up like that ever. And there, you know, by then it was long, not sanitized because I was there long after the massacre occurred, but it was, there were no, all the bodies were removed, but everything inside is still there, to include the smell, and you can never get rid of that smell. And you know, you just say the words and it comes back in your nostrils, especially
Mhm.
working as many homicides as you did. And I, to this day, I mean, I cried when I was in there the last time, because I knew the park, you know, the building's coming down close to the families, and you know, when you see that from another side, it takes you to another place. And I think people forget that we're human too, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're a copper or an author or an interviewer or what, you know, you teach. And Parkland, and you know, it's odd because Parkland and Fort Lauderdale Airport really made me come up with this pro model, right? The prevention, response, and options. And we get so wrapped up in police versus no police, options versus no options. You're buying something, you're selling something. I try to leave it not transactional and make it more of a bring everybody on. Give me your opinion. Tell me what you think. And I want to get into that. But before we do, I was wondering if we could just go back to about that time frame of Fast and Furious, and tell us about your book. I know it's called Deadly Path. Tell us when you wrote it, why you wrote it, and then take me back to getting in that congressional seat.
Sure. I wrote the book because I was getting towards the end of my career. I was the head of training for ATF. So I'd go down to the academy a lot. Right. So, and it's weird when you go down there. I wanted to have a good impression. Well, I wanted to give a good impression to the trainees. I wanted them to know that, even though I was at the higher levels of ATF, I'd come down from headquarters. I'd spend basically about 1 week every month down at the academy, which is down in Brunswick, Georgia. And I would go in and I would sit there and talk to the classes. I would talk to the trainees. Sometimes I'd try to grab lunch or have some sort of interaction with them in a not standing at attention kind of thing. I was more like laid back. Every now and then, some people were just happy to have the job. Like, so they didn't ask any questions. In fact, I used to ask, hey, anybody have any questions? And a lot of times nobody would say anything. So I would start asking them questions. Or like, well, I'm going to pick on some, because I wanted to have the interaction. It wasn't like I was trying to put anybody on the spot. But like every now and then I would have a trainee come up to me and say, hey, man, like I Googled ATF and its history, and I see that you were one of the whistleblowers in Fast and Furious. And it was weird because a lot of them would be freaked out. Like, how do you still have a job? Because I think that they believe most whistleblowers don't keep their job. And there's a reason why I still have mine, and it's in the book. I'm grateful to the folks that had my back, because there were some. But it bothered me because, they look, if you were in the Phoenix Field Division, the perception was that all of us were walking guns. That's not true. There was one small group of people in one group that were involved in that case. It wasn't even like a whole group of 10 people. There was a lot of infighting in that group. So, and then, it's like when you're a cop, right? Like if an officer in your department does something, it stains everybody. It's unfortunate, but that's what happens. So, I mean, like to some people, like all of ATF walk guns. So we had come up with this idea, and I had pitched it to DOJ and to ATF. Like, why don't we do an after action about what happened there, just to educate people about what happened with Fast and Furious, so that it doesn't happen again. Because when you read the book and you see how this thing fell into place, you'll see this could very easily happen again somewhere, and so, even in some local police department, and perhaps not even with firearms. So we were always told, no, 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 we don't. It's like Fight Club. We don't talk about Fight Club. No, they don't talk about Fast and Furious. So we were always told no. So I felt like I owed it to these younger agents that were coming on board to know that their whole agency wasn't fucked up. I also felt like I owed it to agents in other field divisions, because it's funny, you talked about LinkedIn before. I got a message from an agent from ATF who works in he originally worked in Chicago. He's in Denver now. And he's like, hey man, thank God you're writing that book, because we've asked about what happened with Fast and Furious, and they say they treat it like Voldemort. And I don't even know who the fuck Voldemort is, but I heard it's from like one. So I mean, that's how contained the information was. And if you don't know history, you're bound to repeat it. So that's number one. Number two is having intimate knowledge of what happened in Phoenix that led up to Fast and Furious. I wasn't in the group that ran that case, but there was stuff going on before that will really piss you off when you read it. Like I've had the people that write the back cover blurbs. I reached out to some people with some credibility in law enforcement, like Derek Maltz, who was the head of DEA's SOD. Brilliant. I love that guy, man. He's just a straight shooter. So I told Derek once, he was texting me from the airplane. Pete, is this fucking real? Like, oh, you got to be kidding. It's like he was past reading it. And so was some other law enforcement folks that I asked for those back cover blurbs. So I mean, a lot of the folks that made the decisions, who were lawyers, are still there. They weren't touched. So some folks from ATF were fired. Other people were disciplined. Not all that deserved it got it. Some that didn't deserve it got it. But the lawyers were unscathed. And that kind of pissed me off. So I want people to know what their involvement was too. And look, I'm not going to lie. I took a beating, and financially on Fast and Furious, I was able to keep my job, but I didn't make any kind of money or anything like that in any sort of settlement. It would be nice to make some of that money. I paid lawyers back. So that's, sure. Those are the three reasons. But no, what happened was, look, I left New York because, the whole surviving 9/11 was rough, because like the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I did most of my work, was very close to Ground Zero, and driving past it constantly was draining, man. And I started to feel physically ill, like towards like 2006. Thought I was having a heart attack one day. Went to the hospital. Doctors told me I had PTSD. I was not very. I wasn't mean. I'm not rude. I'm not the kind of person that curses people out, but I was like very resistant to believing that was possible. But it started to make me realize maybe I need to get out of New York. So I put in for transfer to Savannah, Jacksonville, Dallas, or Phoenix, and I got picked for Phoenix. So I went out there trying to get away from the stress of driving by Ground Zero, and went out, had a great group of agents who were trying to do good stuff. constantly told why they couldn't do things by prosecutors. I mean, they were swatting cases away like it was going out of style. The five words I hated to hear the most was take it to the county, because we were federal agents, or they were, and they wanted to do federal cases. So what was going on is, for years, like 90% of the cases that we brought to the federal prosecutors were turned away. Right. So then what happened is, when Brian Terry got killed with a gun that was trafficked out of Fast and Furious, an agent from that group who knew what was happening in that group blew the whistle, a guy named John Dodson. And then what happened was, I was at a meeting, a supervisors meeting in Phoenix, where the agent in charge of the Phoenix Field Division made a comment like, well, the U.S. Attorney's Office is really pissed at John Dodson. Don't be surprised if he gets himself indicted. And I'm just sitting there like, wait a minute, 90% of the firearm traffickers that we identified who were sending guns to cartels, where we knew there was bloodshed already happening in Mexico, weren't indicted. But now they're going to indict an ATF agent who spoke up about them letting guns right off into the sunset. I'm like, no fucking way. So then that night I went home, had a chat with the wife. Wouldn't be lying if I said some alcohol was drank. I needed to. And then that following morning, I called Senator Grassley's office and said, hey, man, I know you're being told by Eric Holder and others that John Dodson's lying. He's not lying. Give me a subpoena. I'll tell you everything you want to know. And then a few months later, they did exactly that. And then, so I had a deposition that lasted probably about 6 hours. Told them everything about everything, years worth of stuff. I just laid it all on the table. And then, I think that was like April of 2011. And then in June 15th of 2011, I raised my hand, on C-SPAN. Nobody watches C-SPAN. And,
I did.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. And yeah, so then you saw what I had to say, and I didn't hold back, man, because, look, what bothered me, Chris, aside from Brian Terry dying, was really pissed me off. And I think it was smart of the people to have me on that panel next to Brian's family. Because I don't know that I would have been as direct. I mean, I wouldn't have minimized or sugarcoated, but I was pretty blunt in my testimony, because it bothered me that family, Brian Terry's family, were nice people, like great Americans. They didn't have any answers. Like, people weren't treating them with even the slightest respect. So that's why I was kind of heated in my testimony during parts of it. But yeah, man, it was appalling what I saw out there. And look, the bloodshed's still happening with those guns. As you know, guns don't perish. They're not apples. They're not loaves of bread. I think of 2,000 guns, I think roughly about 1,000 of them have been recovered since then. Some of them at some pretty bad crime scenes. I just felt it was my duty to tell the truth about what happened there,
When you raised your hands, I know that you saw this. I testified in 2007 before K. Bailey Hutchinson's, or I'm sorry, 2002, before K. Bailey Hutchinson's Committee on Terrorism for Ways and Means. They were funding a project, and I don't know how I got involved in it. It doesn't even matter. But I have a funny story, and somebody asked me about this on the last show. I said I was going to wait to say it because I'm waiting for you, brother. I mean, here you are. This isn't about me, but I got to share this with you. And I want you to think back. Did this happen to you at all? Because I'm the first one filled with no, I'm the idiot, right? Please point the finger at me. I'm sitting down in the pre-hearing, and those staffers are like just pencils going into your eyeballs over and over, like, no, say this, no, say it this way. And I'm practicing in the decorum and the etiquette and everything's going on. Finally, we sit down with a senior staffer, and he goes, we're going to go ahead and swear you in, and then we're going to take you and swear you in the chamber. I'm like, cool. So he goes, will you raise your right hand? And I had one lawyer on my right, one lawyer on my left, and two next to them on both sides. And they said, don't say anything, Chris. And they're pointing at me. Nothing you say, nothing you confirm, nothing. I'm like, because it doesn't matter. So I'm like, I know nothing anyway, so don't worry about it. Sir, are you Chris Grollnek? And I remember sitting back just like this. And if you're not watching this podcast right now, take a look. Am I Chris Grollnek? That's yes, I am, right? No, yes, no. And they're shaking their heads, and everyone's like, yes, no. I'm like, so you want me to? Okay. And it seemed like 5 minutes. It was like 10 seconds. And I said, okay, I'm ready. And we go through this thing. We go upstairs, and I'm not kidding you. If you saw the C-SPAN, it happened again, and you see me do this. Yes, yes, yes. And my voice is high, but those are alternative universes that we walk into in those chambers, because people forget that they're human, I think. And I'm not throwing any type of shade or any disrespect towards any of the senators or congressmen, but it is in that ivory tower looking down. And when you're sitting there in that ivory tower, I think it was a little difficult for me. How'd that make you feel personally? I mean, aside from Brian Terry's family, because I appreciate that compassion and empathy, but for you, how did that feel for you?
Well, I didn't get debriefed. Like I had the deposition was months before. So when I got to the hearing, they literally just walked us in, and it was weird. My wife had called me because I mean this was a big scandal, as you remember. And on the Fox News crawler, like whatever they call it, that tickles across the bottom, it said former ATF agent Peter Forcelli is about to testify. So my wife, right, calls me. She goes, "Did you get fired?" And
Yeah,
I'm like, I don't know at this point, because look, DOJ was not happy with me. ATF was not happy with me. For me, the thing was I had testified in court a lot, so I was kind of okay with the testimony. I was just very guarded about, like, because I knew they were going to try to pull me in different political directions, and they did. I found of all the people that interviewed me, the best question and answer I thought came from Trey Gowdy, because he was a former prosecutor. So he was asking me questions like, wow, this is good. Like, this is going to really help people understand what was going on there. A lot of the other ones were like anti-gun, pro-gun control, arm everybody, whatever side of the aisle you were on. But to me, the thing that freaked me out the most was like the people in front of the table. Because, you push the button, you have 5 minutes to articulate what, to activate the mic, and then there's the countdown clock. And like, oh, fuck. But I remember there's guys with cameras, like literally like right in front of me, and like on their knees at the table taking pictures. And like, this is overwhelming, because I'm trying to answer questions from people that are seated in different points of, like, from where you're looking all over the room. And then you have these knuckleheads with cameras, both, clicking away, but also with like video cameras. And it's like, wow, this is really just very, there's a lot of moving parts here. So it was kind
yeah,
of stressful, but I think as time went on, I got a little bit more comfortable. And like I said, I was kind of pissed off because when I heard what the Terrys had gone through, look, I'm a cop at heart, like
of
still,
course.
and that just really like had me burning up inside. So I was a little bit more pointed than I think I would have been. I think I might have been a little bit more politically correct and a little more dialed back had it just been us three agents and not the Terry family. But look, everything I said was true. It's just I was,
Of course.
wasn't very blunt. I mean, I was very blunt in how I expressed it.
Right. Articulated different. I'm telling you, I think that was one of the. I loved watching your interview because I just watched it over the weekend on YouTube. But I remember in real time happening too. So you were part of SES at this time, right? Were
No,
you
when
in SES, or were you just a senior agent, or how did that work?
no, when Fast and Furious happened, I was actually just a somewhat new first line supervisor. I was an agent in New York for about 6 years. I'd worked with ATF for a lot of the 5 years I was in the homicide squad in the Bronx. Like I worked with FBI a little bit, worked with DEA a bit, worked with ATF almost every day. So they knew me. So, I knew how ATF operated a bit before I even started with them officially as an agent. But yeah, I was only a supervisor for about 3 years when Fast and Furious happened. But as soon as I got to Phoenix, I saw things were vastly different from Phoenix than they were in New York. Where New York, the prosecutors would take a case, and look, I'm not saying every case we brought in was perfect, and if it wasn't perfect, they'd say, all right, well, we'll take it, but we want you to do A, B, C, and D, or A, B, C, D, and all the way up to Z. They would, but they would never say, nah, take it away. We're not interested. The level of disinterest from the prosecutor's office in Phoenix was astounding. And I'll give you a quick story. Like it's, we had one caper where a gun was recovered in Cananea, Mexico, right? There were 21 dead bodies in the area where this gun was recovered. The gun had been purchased in Phoenix less than 48 hours earlier, which is rare. I mean, usually guns take a while to turn up at a crime scene. Anything that happens where the gun is recovered like 2 years or less after a gun is purchased, when the trace happens, is becoming kind of a big deal. Like, all right, we need to follow up on this trace. Anything after that could have been a gun that was stolen out of a car or sold at a gun show, which is a little bit harder to nail down who was the actual person that was involved in trafficking it. But 48 hours is like a big deal. So we find the straw buyer. He confesses, yeah, I bought the gun. I gave it to so and so. So and so took it across the border. We get a confession from that person. U.S. Attorney's Office refused to prosecute either of them because, well, the gun's in Mexico. And I'm like, this is crazy because 21 dead people, 4 of them were Mexican cops in Cananea. And then in that incident, there were 4 other cops that were kidnapped by the cartel folks and brought into the desert and beaten and left for dead. So, I mean, this was a pretty heinous scene. And this was turned away for prosecution. And this is one of many. I mean, I talk about a lot of them in depth in the book, But I mean, it's stuff that truly shocks the conscience. And it's funny because when I wrote the book, the editor, because I'm not a great writer, when I wrote it, I wrote 174,000 word manuscript. That
Wow.
well, it was long, too long, and folks were like, "Wow, this is great information, but it's dry, man." So I brought in a ghostwriter and editor. Well, her name's on the book now, and so when I use the word shock the conscience, she's like, "Well, you shouldn't really say shock the conscience because it's not your fault. Like you didn't let these guns go." I'm like, "But you don't understand. I'm part of law enforcement, right? And we are collectively tasked with protecting the public. And the fact that the system allowed this to occur, I feel personally like it shocks my conscience because that's not how we as a collective entity are supposed to operate. We're supposed to protect people. And here you had prosecutors that just thumb their nose at their responsibility, like time and time and time again. And I mean, it wasn't just guns either. There's another case I talk about in the book that involved grenades, over hundreds of grenades going to the Sinaloans. And, we don't know. Could be, he might be making those hilarious complaint department take a number of grenades, no jury appeal here. Move on. It was infuriating.
So you're saying this is about 2011 when this is all going down?
Well, 2011 is when the scandal broke. Brian Terry was
Right.
killed in December of 2010. From 2007, when I first arrived in Phoenix, until late 2009, my group was the Firearms to Mexico group. Like we were, but the thing was, we were interdicting firearms. We weren't letting stuff go. And the dealers would call us. So the way it worked was the gun dealers would call us and say, "Hey, there's a guy that just walked in with a bag of money. And he asked us how many AK variant rifles we have on the shelf, and he wants them all." So we would roll out there and we would do a car stop and interdict those firearms after catching them in lies and questions. And, so the dealers would call us. Then there were times where the dealers would call us and we were tied up with another car stop or another operation. And the dealers would say, "Look, you know what? We're going to tell them they didn't pass the next check or it didn't come back yet. They have to come back tomorrow." And then we would be there tomorrow. Finally, there were other times where we just couldn't be there because other stuff was going on and the dealers just wouldn't make those sales. So the weird thing was during Fast and Furious, the dealers are getting their guns traced back from crime scenes. So the dealers are like, "Hey, man, when we used to call you guys," because my group was retasked to work on home invasions towards 2010 because Phoenix became the capital of home invasions and kidnappings in North America, second in the hemisphere, certainly not a distinction the city of Phoenix wanted. So, but when the transition happened, a lot of the dealers would start calling us saying, "Hey, man, why are our guns getting traced? Like when you guys were doing this work, we weren't getting traces like this. And now we're calling this other group and our guns are getting traced." And at that point, no one in a million years thought, well, these people are letting these guns ride off into the sunset where they could be used against some cop or some kid. And look, the heinous part is the straw purchasers that were buying guns in Fast and Furious, they weren't selling the guns to guys who were target shooting or going hunting for elk. They were murdering people. I mean, they knew because they knew these were cartel people. They had wiretaps up. They were letting guns fall into the hands of people who were trafficking them to human beings who were butchering other human beings. So I mean, it was really just a complete cluster, you know what. But I mean, for years we were doing things the best we could, and in those instances, we would take cases to the county or to the state. But the idea of letting people go, just that didn't sit well with anybody in my group. So I mean, we were pretty pissed off when we found out what was going on in this other group.
Yeah, I think I was on SWAT in 2010 in December when Agent Terry was killed, and the sentiment from I think our department sent every department sent something. It was one of those things where we were all devastated. So watching you then, and cheering you on because we knew the whistleblowers came forward, and then later on when you and I met, and I'm just like, yeah, I can't wait to interview this guy to just talk to him and get the story out. So greatly appreciate that. Where can we get your book if we want to? I'll have Ruben put it on there, but tell the audience where they can order it right now.
Sure. Well, it's called The Deadly Path, and the subtitle is How Operation Fast and Furious and Bad Lawyers Armed Mexican Cartels. It's available on Amazon now for pre-order. I have a website. It's www.peterjforcelli.com. You can order it there as well. It's also available like Barnes and Noble and Target have it available for pre-order, but it hits the shelves on March 5th. But yeah, you can order it and have it shipped out by Amazon or any of those other vendors prior to that.
Right on. Yeah, good. And we'll make sure that we promote that for you and get that out there because I think it's going to be a vital piece of information for everybody. And I say that through the lens of really working on a national problem, right? So I think you know about my movement, which is we can stop. I really believe we can stop active shooters in their tracks. And there's so many polarized positions on this. So before I say I know we can stop them, I want to just tell you it's not a magic pill. I know you know that I believe that. It's not one necessary a gun or not a gun or behavior or not a behavior. I think it starts all over the place. We had a doc on from Doc Vecchi from FBI. He's retired from BSU, and we were talking about behavioral path to path of the aggression, just how to getting off the pathway to violence, really, right? And before you become an active killer and interdicting them, and that's so big. But it's just like preventing cancer, right? As a survivor, I can tell you, like, I would have prevented it had I known. And then, wait a minute, I did know. I chose not to, right? It's like preventing diabetes, but you still go eat sugar donuts, right? So people only want to prevent what they can. So we have to talk about response and we have to talk about options. But I think you hit the nail on the head when we've talked about some of the tragedies. The response, I've coined we can't respond our way out of this anymore. We have to start looking at other ways. What's the magic wand handed to you right now? You wave it. What would it be to stop active shooters? Maybe not in their tracks or the massacres from happening. What would Peter do?
Well, I mean, look, this is a difficult thing. And which, I mean, look, if it was easy, we'd had this problem fixed by now, right? I
Sure.
mean, you have so many different layers to this. And look, the first thing I'll say is the two biggest mass killings that I've responded to in my career, one of which we spoke about was 9/11. The weapons were box cutters and aircraft. No one would have thought it was possible, right? The second biggest was actually the Happy Land Social Club fire back in early, I think it was 1990 or so. Gallon of gas and a book of matches killed 87 people when a guy got spurned by a coat check girl at a nightclub, social club rather, in the Bronx. So, I mean, the two biggest mass killings that I personally had a response to had nothing to do with guns. But look, with the ones that I did respond to that had firearms, Omar Mateen, um, he was on people's radar, right? Because he was communicating with people in the Middle East. And sure, I get it. Like you don't have ESP, you can't predict what people are going to do, but there were things that they could have looked at. The mass shooter from Fort Lauderdale Airport, and I know you responded to that scene. I don't know if you know this, and I'm not trying to blame any particular agency, but
No,
he
not
was
at all.
posting stuff online in Anchorage, Alaska, that said he had allegiance to terror groups in the Middle East. He was interviewed. They thought he was a little bit unbalanced. They took his Walther pistol from him. Then when they decided he was no longer a terrorist and he wasn't adjudicated as mentally defective, which means legally he can have a gun, but he's nuts, which there's a fine line, right? So they gave him his gun back. He took that gun, checked it in with TSA, followed the TSA procedures, flew to Fort Lauderdale, took his gun off the carousel, went into the bathroom, took it out of the bag, loaded it, and massacred 5 people, right? Then you look at Nicholas Cruz. Nicholas Cruz was also on people's radar because of stuff he posted on YouTube. Here's a little thing I'll tell you. And again, it's not to blame people because we can't predict what folks are going to do, but that YouTube video was initially discovered by the FBI. I believe I'm not sure it was in Alabama. I'm not sure which office in Alabama. The special agent in charge of the office in Alabama that took note of that video transferred to Miami, and he was the special agent in charge of the FBI's Miami field division. So he was on both sides, the receiving end of the threat and then the business end of the actual threat when it actually happened, which was a good guy. I mean, I felt bad for him. But so, I mean, then you look at the San Bernardino shooters, right? People took note of them. They didn't want to call anybody because they didn't want to be accused of being Islamophobic. The Sarnev brothers were on people's radar. And so, I mean, there are things that could have been done to prevent some of these things from happening. Is it more surveillance when you have somebody who's on the radar? Because I get it, surveillance is expensive, it's time consuming, and agencies have other things to do. Then we look at prosecution, like we spoke about a little bit here. In New York, the homicide rate in New York City was around 600. Well, in the Bronx rather, was around 600 a year when we started this program called Operation Trigger Lock. And in Operation Trigger Lock, the goal of that was to go after defendants that got caught with firearms who were violent felons or had other baggage that made them prohibited under federal law, to flip them and build bigger cases, right? So RICOs, continuing criminal enterprise cases, Hobbs Act robbery cases, started with low-level firearms possession cases where we knew people had a proclivity to violence. But the other benefit of that was they were getting taken off the street for some time, where in the Bronx, they might do 5 days or 45 days, depending on how they pled out or, whether they got indicted. So, I mean, going after people for their behavior, I think is so much more important than demonizing an inanimate object. You hear about a lot of folks, and look, and I absolutely don't believe, like when Parkland happened, we need to arm the teachers. I know a lot of teachers. I don't want them carrying guns. I just, they're not trained. There's just so many different variables where everybody starts to pull in different directions and come up with suggestions. But I think going after people who have the proclivity to commit violence has to be job one. I think the bigger challenge is a lot of these folks that I just described, with, for example, the guy from Fort Lauderdale Airport and Nicholas Cruz from Parkland, is they're mentally ill. But there's this disconnect because they're not adjudicated as mentally defective. So I know there's some places there's red flag laws. I know some people are concerned that red flag laws can be abused. Um, I imagine there's validity to both sides of that argument. But I mean, look, you can go, if you have mental health issues, you can go into a gun dealer and you could lawfully buy a firearm as long as you're not adjudicated as mentally defective. Well, if you are, how do we communicate that information into NCIC so those people would not pass a NICS check? I mean, it's such a complicated issue. I wish I knew the answer, but maybe collectively, if enough people talk, we'll find it. I'll say this, um, and I don't want to get myself into any hot water because I know this is a political hot button issue. But when Parkland happened, it was 2 days later, Donald Trump came down. President Trump came down to the Broward County Sheriff's Office, and there was a debriefing that happened. I was there. The FBI SAC at the time, Rob Lasky, was there. Marco Rubio was present. So was General Kelly. Governor Scott, he was the governor at the
Rick
time.
Scott
and
was there. That's right.
Yeah, and Pam Bondi was there. And what I'll say is he asked some really, really good questions about how do we fix this. So a lot of the discussion I'm having with you now, I had with him in that room with other people. But other politicians just came down, didn't ask a single thing. They put their foot up on the block and spewed out their talking points from their various sides of the aisle. So there was no discussion. It was like, this is what I believe, and I don't want to hear a thing you say. So I think if more people took that stance of asking important questions, especially to people that can that have the power to put things into place, then things might happen. But that's generally not what happens. And look, you've seen it, Chris. You have more experience in this than I do. Is that the politicians come and they spew that whatever their side of the aisle believes, and they don't want to hear or listen to a thing because they've already kind of made up their mind. But until we start really probing this thoughtfully, I don't know that we'll see an end to this. But there are solutions. Like I said, prosecute people who deserve to be prosecuted. Don't leave them on the street to reoffend. And we have to find a solution to the mental health crisis because that's, I think, the driver of this. And then look, I also think, and this is really unpopular and it really upsets some people when I say it, but I think some of it has to do with how we're raising our kids. And Colonel Grossman, I think, put out a study about
Dave
this.
Grossman. That's right.
Yeah, when you have kids who sit there in front of a television all day and they don't interact with other human beings, they don't learn how to deconflict, they bottle things up, and they sit there with a remote control killing things on a TV screen, desensitizing themselves to murder. I don't think it's a stretch to say that that factors into some of these things. But again, these are a lot of different issues that folks need to come together on and find solutions. And until people are willing to talk, as well as listen, I think we have a rough road ahead.
I couldn't agree with you more. And when you said the political hot topic or hot water, I think we've been programmed at some point, not you, me, humans. We're not supposed to talk about one thing. We are supposed to talk about another, but we've lost the ability to communicate just an opinion because we become passionate about a position instead of our opinion. And I think a lot of that goes directly into this problem. So you touched on things that we preach from the altar of prevention, right? Which is it's going to take the United States general public to solve this problem, right? Law enforcement has so many complex things that, well, you have a gun, go fix it.
Mhm.
Okay, well, did you know that the last 8 massacres at schools, there were teachers armed or police armed or someone armed on scene that did nothing?
Oh,
That's a lot in, and that's consecutive. There's no breaks in between that. the last 8. So when you look at that, you say, okay, that's atrocious. Maybe it's not guns. Maybe it's people. Well, it goes both sides. Some people can stop and some people can't. Like, look at the Border Patrol, the Bortac guy that stopped Uvalde, right? He just had enough and stopped it.
Yeah.
And then, so I
And then
mean,
the
that's
Tennessee guys, we got to keep them in mind too. Those guys, their response was magnificent. Those
but
guys that
again,
went in.
getting
Yeah,
them on scene though was a horror. You know, we see the 3-minute response to getting them, but what we forget is it took 5 minutes to get a hold of them, 3 minutes for them to drive there, 2 minutes to get the equipment out of the car. And they were exceptional. But what you
yeah,
may not know is there were 2 people armed inside the school that day.
I
But
didn't know
then,
that.
right. So those are the things that we're failing to just have that conversation about. And that's why I really appreciate you saying it's complex and, it comes from different perspectives. And if we get everybody involved in a different perspective, so I'll give you a couple shout outs and a couple ideas of what I'm saying. One, we can't have a business mind in this business. And I'm called like the grand old man of active shooters, which is atrocious, right? I was in one in 2010. I wrote my master's thesis in the phenomena of it, and I've consulted everybody, to include a president or two, on these things, whether it's on telephone or in person, Congress, Senate, everybody. And I hear the same things. Some have those stump problems, like you said. They put their foot up on that stump and they want to tell you their speech and they forget about what's wrong. And then the other ones that are, you know, hogtied, if you will, because they're tied to a party, they're tied to an affiliation, they're tied to a lobby, they're tied to whatever. So we started saying, look, we can get away from that and let's look at mental health. So I'll tell you from a business perspective, and this is where everybody in Active Shooter Prevention Project just stops and says, we're not promoting other companies. I say, you're right, we're promoting saving lives. So David Grossman, another public speaker, probably one of the
Yes.
best there is. He was I would say he's a mentor to me. If you asked him, he'd say, yeah, I know Chris, but it'd be like easy. I spoke to him maybe 5 or 6 times, but there were nights where I called him at his house and said, hey, sir, I'm getting ready to do this. What would you do? And then somebody that he worked for in the Army, another guy, Dr. Morgan Banks, he spent a lot of quality time with me, working through the psychology sides, because I don't know about the psychology side. I know about the fundamental issue of what happens and how it happens, and that's my master's thesis about. And then finally, like Catherine Schweit, one of the founders of the Active Shooter Project, or the Active Shooter desks at the FBI. She's a public speaker. She writes books. She believes it's about guns, and she believes it's about families. And I mean, she has a great broad range. And she'd probably be surprised that I told you. I think she's probably one of the most gifted in the area when it comes to articulating one thing. I would just say that it's the one thing that she's great at articulating. And I'm not great at articulating one thing, but maybe okay at articulating a lot. We need to start at the zero side and just move the needle. And I think, I'm going to ask you again, because you said it. So I'm going to preach. Nicholas Cruz, I hate saying his name, put that video on the internet, and it's still there today. So everybody, before you get up in arms, just hear me out. I don't care about COVID. I care that it affected our lives. I believe it's dangerous and deadly. Whatever you believe, I believe too. That's fine. You can have your own opinion. I believe you. But if you put something on YouTube right now, Facebook, Twitter, name the social platform, you're going to get a return back in 100th of a second that says what? About COVID. Visit the COVID-19 Center for more information so you're not spreading, bum scoop. But the killer at Parkland had a video online. And could you tell us I can't say it. So can you tell us a little bit about what it said, maybe? The video that he posted. Do you remember?
I don't remember. It's been a
He
while.
said I'll give you the high end, where he was going, what he was going to do, how many people he wanted to kill, what bullets he was going to use, the gun he was going to use. And it was online for a while. And what I'm saying is I think there's some social responsibility from the social media sites that say, look, if we can tell people that COVID-19 is dangerous, we can tell people that Omar Mateen has been talking to ISIS and saying that he wants to, do a cause of whatever the cause was, LGBTQ, that he had in his head. It was definitely a hate crime aside from a murder, but there's a way to notify the public, I think. And
Sure.
could you expand on that at all?
No, and look, yeah, absolutely. And look, part of the problem is when you go back to the San Bernardino shooter, and look, I didn't know specifically exactly what Nicholas Cruz said, but yeah, you're right. He predicted, he forecasted what he was going to do with a degree of specificity. With the shooters from San Bernardino, their names escape me. If you remember, they had explosives too. People saw them with their garage door open, engaged in behavior that was suspicious, and they didn't call anybody because this was when they interviewed the neighbors. They didn't want to be accused of being Islamophobic, right? In a lot of these instances, there are things that predict this. In the video, I mean, it can't get any better than that, you would think. But the problem is people are afraid to take action. The social media companies, it's interesting how they'll restrict some speech, but not restrict other speech. And I would think anything where you're going to forecast killing somebody should be, job one, because, when you could prevent a murder and you let it happen, you should almost feel a little bit guilty if you don't. But there are other things that we can do to prevent. I don't know if you're familiar with a town in Pennsylvania called Salem.
Of course.
Okay. Have you seen, I know they tried to implement some measures where they were going to use license plate reader technology and facial recognition technology when they had people who they believe were a threat, whether it was a disgruntled parent or someone who made threats, so they would be able to have the police notified as that person got closer. So basically it was like a perimeter, like layers. A license plate reader would hit, okay, time to notify the police because this person might be coming there. And then facial recognition technology. I don't know how full they've gone into the implementation of that, but I know they were exploring it. But I mean, one of the other problems is there is technology out there that would help us, but we're so caught up in privacy, and I fully understand why, right? We worry about our privacy, but there are layers out there that they can use, but so many people are against it. But yet these same folks have no issue with what Google and Facebook collect on them so that they could send them advertisements so that they can get a discount on a drill or, whatever, toothpaste. So, I mean, I just think there's so many things that we have to get past, politics, privacy concerns, mental health concerns before we can ever really find a solution. But I did find that interesting what Ben Salem was looking to do with at least having the ability to have the police start responding sooner, not waiting till that first gunshot goes off. Because I mean, look, as you pointed out earlier, minutes save lives. First it maybe prevents the shooting, but even if God forbid a shooting happens, there's that golden hour. If you can get help there faster, to help stop the bleeding, to help provide medical aid, you'll save lives. We'd rather that not happen, obviously. But I mean, it's just like I said, it's many, many layers to the onion.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that I won't go into that city specifically because I do have inside information about it, but there are school districts that are implementing things like that. Artificial intelligence reads license plates, facial recognition, signatures of violence, a weapon present. Then that'll notify an evacuation, and the evacuation is notified based on where that shooter or possible would-be shooter is. Gunshot detection. Here, police, I'm over here. So many fascinating things and components to it. Some of the problem, of course, is funding, but others is everyone's sold on one solution, and my new pin drop lock is going to lock your door better than the lock you have. We have to get away from that. And that's why I share everything about other companies, and I invite other companies to come on and just tell us about your product, tell us why, because I really believe this is going to take an all hands on deck to solve this problem. It's been great having your perspective about from the ATF side and your personal perspective, where you came from. You're human, you have a lot of the same thoughts and feelings as most people watching, and some others, and other opinions, and I hope they appreciate yours and you theirs. But let me wrap up with this two things. First is, the good interviewer, for suspects, you're not a suspect. What's the last question I should ask, right? Is there anything I haven't asked you that you want me to ask you? So is there anything you want to get out there before I get on to my very last question? Because now the mic is yours.
Yeah, it is something because look, you and I have had the experience of going to crime scenes and seeing things that cops can't unsee, right? And it's not just cops, it's first responders, it's firemen. Nowadays, unfortunately, it's teachers, right? In these school shootings or whoever. We come from a culture where years ago, and I think I'm a little bit older than you, but we started earlier. Today it's changed a little bit, and this is encouraging to me that it's changed. But there was this period where it's like, hey, I'm the police. I don't ask for help. I'm the person that you come to for help, right? We've seen things that you can't unsee, and it leaves a mark. And so, I mean, I know you have a large following that's law enforcement officers, and other first responders. If you need help, ask for help. There was a stigma back in the day for folks doing that. You can't help others if you aren't taking care of yourself. You can't help your family if you aren't taking care of yourself. I always tell people it's great to give a job 100% of your effort. Don't give it 100% of your time. take care of yourselves, take care of your families so you can be more effective at work. And, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not do something about it. So, this is a tough business. And in the old days, you were expected to suck it up, and that wasn't healthy for folks. So what I would ask is, look, it took me years. I missed a lot of my kids' time. There were times I was sitting in my couch watching TV, not even really watching TV, brother, because I had the job going on in my head. And that's not a good way to live, man. So take care of yourselves, take care of your families, and this way, when you get to retirement and the job forgets you, because it will forget you, then you'll be with the people who matter.
Yeah, it'll forget you. You'll never forget it. And
Right.
I think that's beautiful. Truthfully, I mean, I've been to counseling for probably 5 or 6 years, not just because of the job, because of life. But somebody said it to me once that was, you go to the gym. I run. I'm a big runner. I'm a survivor, but I'm also a big runner. And they say you take care of your body running. How come you don't take care of your soul and your mind? And that hit me. That changed me
Yeah.
one day. And I came from a heroin overdose of an 18-year-old one day, and I came home and I cried, and I just needed to change something. I didn't know what it was, but it turned out I was talking to somebody, and I thought that was ridiculous. And now much stronger person for it. And there's a lot of respect for people that need it. Thank you for saying that, because that's awesome. I'm gonna bring that up to the on the next panel too. So thank you. Um, all right, so we got it set up with really serious, some little minor funny stuff. No comedian, but I'm not. Let me just ask you this: what would you tell your 15-year-old self? Because you wanted to be a cop, you said early on, and you're going. What lesson would you have gone to learn, and what advice would you give yourself looking back to make sure Peter Forcelli was on the right track?
When I started this job, I thought it was a tough guy's job. I thought it was a job for those who are physically strong, and it is. You should be those things. But I think it's more important to be humble and to listen a lot more than you talk, because look, this is a job where when you come in, you're constantly learning. I always thought that once you get to a certain level, you know the job. But as I got into the job, and look, I went through a phase where I thought I knew everything, probably towards, I'd say, 5 or 6 years on the job in uniform, had medals and everything. Well, and then you start to realize that, wait a minute, that's not how it works, man. Like, the criminals change their ways, technology changes, the laws change, Supreme Courts come out with rulings. So just be a sponge, and be humble. And most importantly, have empathy, because, the people that you deal with, a lot of times, bad guys too. Um, you know, there's not much that separates you from them. They make different decisions along their lives than you did, but just be a good person. That's, I think, the most important thing. Law enforcement is about being a good human being and taking care of folks, more so than anything else. It's not about power; it's about responsibility.
Well, sir, I think you got that on the nail on the head, because you're a good human being and you're a really good person that I know. And I'm very honored to know you. I'm flattered that you took the time to come on the podcast. I hope we can sell a couple books for you, recoup some of that attorney fee. I hope I think you got it in the mail, maybe.
I
You got
did.
the second one of these. I
Oh,
sent
wow.
you one before, one of our round ones, but this is the new founder's coin. It's you got the second one ever produced, and there's only about 200 of them ever going to be made. So I hope you hang on to it and maybe share and
It's on
spread the
my wooden
word. And
flag. I got a
right
big
on.
Yeah, no, it's no, hey, Chris, and the feeling's mutual, man. I have deep respect for you. I love what you do. You're a humble guy. You're a guy who works hard, and I know that you're a guy who I look up to. So I
Thank
can't
you.
tell you how thrilled I am to be here and have a conversation with you. And it's been fun.
Well, you're invited back anytime, Peter, and I appreciate you very much. And to the whole audience, I just want to say thank you on behalf of them. Thank you for trusting us, and y'all have a good day. Stay tuned. Don't forget to hit like, follow, and share. And most importantly, I think I'm supposed to say subscribe, but sometimes I don't remember. Kick it out of my own way. Thanks, everybody. All right, let me ask Peter something real quick, Ruben, and then you can jump in here with your stuff. Hey, man, do you know Charlie Fuller? He's passed now, but a
Yeah.
famous eight. Okay, I was
Oh,
his vice president of the International Association of Undercover Officers.
wow. Well, there's a bar named after him on Fletchy's campus,
Yes, sir.
right?
His wife was the director.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know this. My daughter went through the academy with his son.
No kidding.
My daughter, hold on. My daughter went through
Oh
the
yeah,
ATF Academy
I got it.
with Charlie Fuller's son.
So Charlie met me. Let me say it differently. I met Charlie, but really Charlie met me. He found me, and I'm not. I'm humble. I'm not talking shit. I'm just telling you like what happened. We were. I was at the Regional Counter Narcotics Training Academy in Meridian, Mississippi, and he was running the program there. And I'd been undercover a year and a half, and it's kind of that thing where I was 35 and I knew everything. If you asked me, I would have told you. I know
I've been
exactly.
there, brother. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he puts me through a scenario and I aced it. And when I say I aced it, I mean there were prostitutes and they're feeling me up for a wire. I'm like, oh, you want to play this game? Show me your, like everything you could do. I got them turning red and walked away from me. I'm like, guess you don't want my dope. I don't want yours either, right? I mean, it was like one of those things. So he put me through another one that humbled me in about 300th of a second. I don't remember what it was, but he came up afterwards. He goes, Chris, if you can learn like that, I'd like to talk to you later. No idea what he's talking about. I thought I'm in trouble. I get sent for, go to the office, and there's a commander there that runs our CTA, and Charlie's in there. He goes, how'd you like a job coming to teach? I'm like, me? Like, what? Bro, the whole world's out there. He's like, yeah, no, I know about, because somebody put a hit out on my wife and daughter in 2003 for a crack rock for my daughter's life, because I had shut down some Black Panthers trafficking kilos. That's how I got to the ATF task force, and then DEA. But yeah, I learned a lot about fast talking, fast moving, and interviewing people on the fly. And Charlie, boy, he put me on that path, and like he must have beat my ass 500 times. But Billy McQueen, they somebody I want
Billy
to get on the
Queen.
show one day. Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to get him on the show one day.
Well, there's a book that just came out too. It's called Riding with Evil. A very good friend of mine. He lives here in Northern Virginia. His name's Ken Croak. He just infiltrated. Well, he didn't just infiltrate. He just retired a little bit before I did. He wrote a book on infiltrating the pagans.
I do know Steve Queen. That was also he's a Illinois cop though. He was a longtime ATF guy. He's on every documentary special there is. He was our treasurer. So,
okay. Yeah.
But
so no, man, if I
yeah.
get him, he'll put you in touch with somebody from ATF. I mean, you sounds like you got plenty of connections, especially, Charlie Fuller. He's a legend in it, even though, yeah, man, that's amazing.
Outlaws. I can't remember what our shirts say, but I've got our tattoo, the International Association of Undercover Officers, right here. It's the fedora and a trench coat, and it says UC in it. And I know Charlie passed away, and that was a special guy. But yeah, some of the best times I ever had was ATF, man. So I just I appreciate you very much, and I probably will reach out to you about Billy Queen or
Let me know,
Jay
brother.
or somebody. I've talked to both of them before, but they wouldn't remember who I am, and that's fine with me.
Yeah, well, I don't know Billy Queen. I do know Jay Dobbins. In fact, Jay wrote one of the blurbs for my cover. So did Ken Croak. And then Blake Butler, who you might know, he was the head of
Blake.
Yeah, Blake did some undercover work with the Sons of Silence. He's another just humble, solid dude. No, man. Yeah. And look, I said, I meant what I said, man. I have a lot of respect for you, brother.
Thank you.
Anytime I can help you, just reach out.
Right on. Ruben, how are we doing, buddy? You got anything? Okay, I don't think that you meant to say you were going to slap Peter, so I won't tell him that you said that. How about that? Okay, Merry Christmas. Talk to you soon, brother.
Take care, brother. Take care. Take care, Ruben.